The most incestuous cousins of Louisiana. After generations of marriages, they generated the most deformed children. In the heart of Louisiana's isolated swamps, far from the eyes of modern society, a family maintained a dark secret for decades, a secret that only surfaced in 1978 when local authorities finally entered the property of the Budro family. What they found shocked even the most experienced researchers: a family lineage that for over a century had practiced marriages among close relatives, resulting in one of the most disturbing stories of genetic degradation ever documented in the United States. The Budro family settled in the Pantanosa region of Terrebonne Parish around 1850, when Jean-Baptiste Budro, a Cajun fisherman, built a rudimentary cabin on the banks of an isolated bayou. For the following 3 generations, the family remained relatively integrated with the small local community. It was only after the Great Depression, when economic difficulties intensified, that the Budros gradually began to withdraw from social life. Maurice Budro, the great-grandson of Jean-Baptiste, decided in 1935 to move his family to an even more remote area of the swamps, claiming that the outside world was corrupt and that only family purity could be trusted. This decision marked the beginning of a deliberate isolation that would last for decades. Maurice had 5 children, 3 men and 2 women, who grew up with practically no contact with people outside the family unit. Dr. Robert Thibodeau, a geneticist at the University of Louisiana who later studied the case, explains, geographic isolation alone does not cause consanguinity. It was the combination of this physical isolation with a distorted family ideology that created the conditions for this genetic tragedy. Recovered property documents revealed that Maurice had developed a kind of family doctrine based on distorted interpretations of religious texts and a belief that Budro blood possessed superior qualities that needed to be preserved. He actively encouraged relationships between cousins initially, and later, even between siblings. Ellie Carter, a social worker who participated in the investigations, describes what she saw. The property was like an island in time, without electricity, without a radio, without any connection to the outside world. The younger children, the 3rd generation of this closed system, showed obvious signs of physical and cognitive impairment. The first generation of weddings between cousins produced children with relatively moderate problems. Joseph Budro, Maurice's eldest son, married his first cousin, Marie, in 1953. They had 6 children, 2 of whom were born with extra fingers, polydactyly, and 1 with a cleft lip. However, everyone could work reasonably well in the isolated family environment. The true genetic deterioration began to manifest in the next generation when the children of Joseph and Marie were also encouraged to marry each other. Paul and Annette Budro, who were cousins, had 4 children between 1971 and 1976. All were born with serious congenital anomalies, including microcephaly, severe facial deformities, and profound intellectual impairments. Check to see if you are already subscribed to this channel. The story of these Louisiana cousins is just one of the many disturbing revelations about consanguinity that we share exclusively here. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next chapters, which reveal even more shocking secrets of these isolated families. The discovery of the Budro family occurred by chance in March of 1978. A local hunter, Thomas Lublau, lost his way in the swamps during a storm and sought shelter near the isolated property. What he glimpsed from a distance disturbed him deeply: children with unusual appearances moving uncoordinatedly in the backyard of the main house. They were like beings from another world, Lublau later reported to the police. Some had disproportionately small heads. Others had twisted limbs. The whole scene caused me indescribable discomfort. When authorities finally entered the property in April 1978, they found a complex of 5 rudimentary houses occupied by 32 people, all interconnected by a complex kinship network. Photographs and confiscated personal documents revealed that by that time, first cousins had married for 3 consecutive generations, and in the latest generation, even siblings had formed unions. Sheriff Dale Thierat documented his initial impressions: "I had never seen anything like it in 22 years of career. Some of the younger children could barely be recognized as human at first glance. There was a girl of about 6 years who could not walk or talk, just emitted guttural sounds, was disproportionately short, and her face presented characteristics that reminded me of a nightmare being." Dr. Margaret Wilson, a pediatrician who examined the children, elaborated detailed reports on the medical conditions found in the third generation of consanguineous marriages. We observed an alarming concentration of deleterious recessive genes. 12 of the 17 children born after 1970 had serious craniofacial deformities and cardiovascular problems. 4 were born with advanced polydactyly, not just extra fingers, but complex and non-functional digital structures. One of the most impressive cases was that of Emily Budro, born in 1974, the result of the union between Paul and Annette, first-degree cousins who shared the same grandparents. Emily had a rare condition known as cyclopia. She had only one central eye positioned where her nose would normally be and did not have a nasal septum. Her life expectancy was extremely limited, but she surprisingly survived until she was 4 years old. Jerome Budro, the family patriarch at the time of the discovery and son of Maurice, vehemently defended the family practices when confronted by the authorities. What we do is no one's business. We have always lived our way, far from the rules of others. Our family is strong precisely because we keep our blood pure. Anthropologist Dr. Claire Fontenot, who studied the case extensively, explains, "What we observed in the Budro family is a phenomenon known as the founder effect combined with repeated consanguinity. When a small and isolated population continues to reproduce internally, certain genetic traits, including the harmful ones, become increasingly concentrated. The Budros, genetically limited, then committed deliberately consanguineous marriages, exponentially amplifying the problems. The investigation revealed that the family had developed its own simplified language, a dialect derived from Cajun French but practically incomprehensible to external speakers. Their religious practices were equally peculiar, a mixture of distorted Catholicism, local superstitions, and beliefs invented by Maurice decades earlier. Improvised medical records maintained by Lorraine Budro, who assumed the role of the family healer, documented a disturbing pattern. Each new generation had more health problems than the previous one, with increasingly severe child mortality. The authorities faced an unprecedented ethical and legal dilemma. Louisiana laws prohibited marriages between siblings, but marriages between first-degree cousins, although socially disapproved, were not technically illegal in the state at that time. Furthermore, many of the unions had never been officially registered, existing only within the context of Budro family traditions. District Prosecutor Martin Gudari decided to focus primarily on the children's well-being. Our immediate focus should be on providing appropriate medical care for these children, some of whom have never received any kind of professional attention. Legal issues related to weddings can wait. 17 children under 18 were temporarily removed from the property and placed under intensive medical care. The exams revealed the alarming extent of the health problems. In addition to visible deformities, many suffered from serious internal conditions, including congenital heart disease, kidney malformations, and severe neurological problems. The case gained limited notoriety in the local media, but authorities endeavored to contain the dissemination of details and photographs, citing concerns about the dignity of the victims. A Times-Picayune journalist, however, was able to briefly interview Alice Budro, one of the few family members with the capacity to communicate articulately with external people. "We didn't know there was another way," said Alice, then 32, herself the result of a marriage between first-degree cousins and married to her cousin, Raymond. "For as long as I can remember, that's how things worked. When you grow up listening that the outside world is dangerous and that only the family can be reliable, you believe it." The Budro case became a milestone in studies on the effects of prolonged consanguinity. Dr. Victor Lamar, a forensic geneticist who examined samples collected from the family, later published an anonymous study protecting the identity of those involved that became a reference in the medical literature. Lamar wrote, "What we observed here is one of the most dramatic examples ever documented of the effect of harmful recessive gene homozygosis. After 4 generations of consanguineous marriages, the coefficient of inbreeding reached levels that made the manifestation of rare genetic conditions virtually inevitable. When you think of the unimaginable suffering of these Budro children, confined to Louisiana's swamps for generations, what emotion predominates in your heart? Leave in the comments. The pain of these children makes me reflect on humanity. The older children, capable of basic communication, reported disturbing aspects of family life to social workers. Martha Budro, then 14, explained how they were taught early on that marrying outside people meant betraying the family and contaminating the lineage. Uncle Jerome always said that our blood was special, that we had to keep it pure. When any of us questioned it, he showed photographs of people from the city and said they were all sick and weak. The most tragic of the findings was made in a small makeshift cemetery on the property. Hidden between cypress trees and partially submerged in the swamp, it contained 23 rudimentary graves, most of them for babies and young children who had not survived due to extreme deformities. Many of these births had never been officially recorded. Dr. Patricia Montgomery, a psychologist designated to evaluate adult family members, found consistent patterns of compromised cognitive development even among those who did not have apparent physical deformities. What we observed are the combined effects of extreme social isolation, repeated consanguinity, and educational and cultural deprivation, she concluded in her report. Ironically, the records meticulously maintained by Maurice Budro, the original patriarch who began the family isolation, became a valuable source for researchers. His diaries, written between 1935 and 1968, documented genealogies, births, and physical characteristics of the descendants obsessively, often with disturbing observations on how to improve the lineage through specific unions. The fate of the Budros became a complex issue for Louisiana's social assistance system. The most severely affected, with multiple impairments, were sent to specialized institutions. Those with greater functional capacity were placed in adoptive homes, although their unusual family history and behavioral problems resulting from extreme isolation made successful adaptation difficult. Shelley Romos, one of the social workers designated for the case, recalls, these children faced monumental challenges. In addition to the physical and cognitive limitations resulting from consanguinity, there was cultural shock. Many had never seen a television, did not know what a telephone was, and had extremely limited concepts about the world beyond the swamps. The adult family members faced their own set of difficulties. With no professional skills, no formal education, and often presenting moderate cognitive problems, their integration into conventional society proved virtually impossible. Some remained in nearby rural areas under the regular supervision of authorities to prevent the reconstitution of the old family arrangement. The case provoked legislative debates in the state. In 1980, partially motivated by the Budro case, though never explicitly mentioned, Louisiana strengthened its laws against consanguineous marriages, including more severe penalties and expanding the legal definition of prohibited relationships to explicitly include first cousins. The scientific legacy was equally significant. Genetic samples collected with judicial consent, as many had no legal ability to consent, were used in pioneering research on rare genetic diseases. Chromosomal analysis revealed mutation patterns that helped identify specific genes associated with various conditions. Elena Bro, a geneticist who studied the samples, explains, although the circumstances are deeply tragic, the genetic data obtained allowed advances in understanding multiple rare conditions. We identified specific patterns of genetic expression that would normally be extremely rare in the general population. Among the most studied cases was that of Daniel Budro, born in 1975, who had an extraordinary combination of phenylketonuria, PKU, Meacham syndrome, a rare silenopathy disturbance, and an unusual form of albinism. The mathematical probability of these three recessive genetic conditions manifesting simultaneously in an individual from the general population would be infinitesimal. But the repeated consanguinity over generations had concentrated multiple deleterious genes. A particularly disturbing aspect revealed during investigations was the gradual normalization of deformities within the family system. Jerome Budro, in his own records, had developed a classification for the different types of children born into the family, assigning them functions based on their abilities. It is evident that over the generations the family developed its own social system that accommodated and categorized the growing abnormalities, said anthropologist Dr. Andre Leitzker. Children with certain types of deformities were designated for certain family functions, creating a perverse hierarchy based on the type and severity of genetic impairments. The recovered photographic evidence from the property, today maintained in confidential files, documents the progressive genetic deterioration over generations. Comparing images from the 1950s with those from the 1970s, experts were able to trace the visible climb of anomalies as consanguineous marriages intensified. Dr. Lamar explains, in the first generation of weddings between cousins, photographs show subtle facial asymmetries and occasional digital anomalies, extra or fused fingers. In the next generation, we already see children with obvious craniofacial disproportion. In the third generation of consanguinity, photographs document individuals with such severe malformations that they defy standard medical classifications. A longitudinal study conducted between 1980 and 1995 followed the development of the surviving children. The results confirmed that even with intensive medical intervention and access to specialized education, the genetic damage was largely permanent and progressive. Of the 17 children initially removed from the property, only 9 survived until 1995, with most having a significantly reduced life expectancy. The Budro case is often cited in academic discussions about ethics, genetics, and social responsibility. The central ethical dilemma it presents revolves around the conflict between individual or familial autonomy and the state's responsibility to prevent harm. How much freedom should a family, however isolated, have to live by its own rules when those rules lead to predictable and profound suffering? The case forces a confrontation with the question, at what point does respect for privacy become negligence? From a genetic standpoint, the Budro tragedy serves as a stark, real-world illustration of principles typically confined to textbooks. It provides irrefutable evidence of the consequences of the founder effect and the dramatic increase in homozygosity for deleterious recessive alleles in a closed population. For educators and researchers, it is a powerful, albeit harrowing, case study that underscores the very purpose of genetic diversity. In terms of social responsibility, the Budro narrative is a damning indictment of collective inaction. It highlights how societal mechanisms, whether due to indifference, a misguided hands-off approach, or the dismissal of rumors as folklore, can fail catastrophically. The case demonstrates that protection of the vulnerable sometimes requires proactive intervention into communities that are intentionally separate from the mainstream. It sparked crucial reforms, leading to more robust outreach programs and training for professionals working in rural and isolated areas, ensuring that signs of similar situations would not be so easily overlooked or ignored in the future. Thus, the Budro family's story endures in academia not merely as a historical curiosity but as a profound ethical touchstone, constantly challenging professionals across multiple fields to define the boundaries of intervention and the price of indifference. The Budro case is more than a tragic story, it is an enduring benchmark in academic circles, forcing difficult conversations across multiple fields. The case pushes the classic ethical harm principle to its limits. While society generally agrees on intervening to prevent immediate, visible harm, like abuse, the Budro situation involved a slow-motion, cumulative harm that was generations in the making. This raises profound questions. At what point is intervention justified when the harm is statistical and probabilistic? After the first generation of cousins married, the risk of genetic disorders in the next generation was elevated, but not a certainty. Should authorities intervene based on a risk, or must they wait for observable, widespread suffering to manifest? The Budro case suggests that by the time the harm is undeniable, it is also irreversible and catastrophic. The right to cultural integrity versus the right to health. Could the Budro's practices be defended as a unique cultural or religious belief system? This forces a debate on cultural relativism. Where is the line between respecting a subculture's autonomy and upholding universal human rights, particularly the right of a child to be born free of preventable, severe disabilities? The family's ideology, however distorted, was a core part of their identity, making intervention a form of cultural imposition. The case exposed significant gaps and ambiguities in the law, making it a staple in discussions of legal philosophy and reform. The problem of unregistered unions. Since many marriages were never officially recorded, they existed in a legal vacuum. This highlights the limitation of laws that govern formal institutions but fail to address de facto relationships, especially in intentionally isolated communities. Prosecutorial challenges. Who, if anyone, could be held legally responsible? Jerome Budro, while a dominant patriarch, did not necessarily break specific laws that were clear and enforceable at the time. Charging parents who were themselves products of the system and cognitively impaired raised further ethical issues about culpability and competence. This leads to discussions about crimes of omission and the need for laws that target the creation of conditions for harm, not just the harmful acts themselves. The Budro case presents a stark example of a recurring ethical problem in science: the acquisition of invaluable knowledge from morally reprehensible circumstances. The Tuskegee syphilis study parallel, like the infamous Tuskegee study, where valuable data on syphilis was gathered by withholding treatment from African American men, the genetic data from the Budro family was gained through immense human suffering. This forces a critical question: can and should such data be used? Does using it somehow justify or perpetuate the original wrong? Informed consent in extremis, the genetic samples became the subject of intense study. However, most family members were utterly incapable of giving informed consent due to cognitive limitations and a complete lack of understanding of the modern world. This case is used in bioethics courses to discuss the limits of consent and the special protections required for profoundly vulnerable populations. For sociologists, the Budro family is a terrifyingly pure example of how social systems adapt to extreme circumstances. Creating a closed world, the development of a unique dialect, a syncretic religion, and an internal hierarchy based on deformities demonstrates humanity's powerful drive to create coherent social structures, even when those structures are built on a foundation of suffering. It shows how normal is a socially constructed concept. Within the family, severe deformities became normalized and integrated into the social order. The role of outsider complicity. The academic discussion extends to the sociology of the surrounding communities. The bystander effect was amplified by geographic and cultural distance. The case is studied as an example of how rumors and willful ignorance can function as social mechanisms that allow atrocities to occur in plain sight, simply by defining that sight as not our business. At its most profound level, the Budro case forces a philosophical reckoning. The nature of personhood. Descriptions of children who could barely be recognized as human challenge our definitions of personhood. What makes us human? Is it a specific genetic code, a particular physical form, or the capacity for consciousness and relationship? The case pushes these abstract questions into a painfully concrete realm. The problem of unimagined lives. The children born into the Budro family had no framework to imagine an alternative existence. Their world was the swamp, their family, the entire universe. This raises a philosophical problem about suffering. Is suffering greater when one knows what they are missing, or when suffering is the only reality they have ever known? In conclusion, the Budro case is not a closed chapter but an open wound in the academic consciousness. It serves as a complex, multifaceted benchmark against which theories of ethics, law, and society are stress-tested. It remains a powerful, haunting reminder that the most challenging problems lie not in the clear choices between right and wrong, but in the murky, intergenerational space where autonomy, culture, science, and profound human suffering tragically collide.